Recording in progress.
We'll go live in 3, 2, 1.
Good evening. I'm Bernard Green, Chair of the Brookline Select Board, and welcome to the joint meeting of the Select Board and the Advisory Committee for Tuesday, February 20, 2024. The main purpose of this meeting is to receive a report on the financial plan presented by the Town Administrator, Chaz Carey, and the Deputy Town Administrator, Melissa Goff. For efficiency's purposes, this meeting, as we have over the last few years, is being held as a joint meeting of the Select Board and Advisory Committee to save Chaz and Melissa the need to attend more meetings than is necessary. After the presentation of the financial plan, we will take questions and comments from the Select Board and the Advisory Committee, and then we will take questions and comments from the public. But before any of that, the Select Board has some of its regular business to which it must attend, starting with updates and announcements by the Select Board, and I will start out. I just want to mention to everyone that this is Devon's last Select Board meeting, so I hope everyone takes advantage of her tough but personable responses or ways of stopping people mid-sentence when they go over time on their comments, and how she very nicely tells people that they have 30 seconds. And even the most obstreperous, I guess is the word, people commenting usually say, "Thank you, Devon." So you have that effect on other people to calm them down and to make them more personable also. So, we all appreciate that, not just me. I mean, everyone I think in town appreciates that, as well as all the other things you do for us. So, we will miss you. Of course, we all wish you the best as you move up the ladder in your career. So, okay, so that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay. My next comment is March 8th, there will be a primary election in Massachusetts. Many people think that primary elections in a deep blue state with an incumbent president on the Democratic ticket is of no importance. But it's nonetheless important to vote in every election, in my opinion, to show that you're committed to voting and the democratic process, which is under attack, as we all know. And also, if you take your children to vote with you, it's a way to begin sort of creating that muscle memory for voting in them at a young age so that they will continue voting as they get older and join the electorate. So that's the only two updates I have. Any others? Yes, John.
Question, how many people in Brookline remember 5 years ago when we first began to consider at town meeting the possibility of a ban on fossil fuels in new buildings in Brookline? Those who remember back 5 years might want to take note of the fact that today, after many twists and turns and additional efforts that took several years, the ban takes effect in Brookline. So mark this day. And Brookline isn't the only community in which this is being launched, this pilot effort to show that a ban on fossil fuel in new construction can work. And in fact, might be a good idea for every community in Massachusetts. Currently, Cambridge, Lexington, Lincoln, they're also part of the program. But WGBH, thankfully, has done a report, which I heard a brief excerpt of on my way to this meeting. And as a one-time employee of WGBH, I will advise people they might want to listen to the morning news on GBH tomorrow, just on the chance that there might actually be the report in full. But it's a good day for Brookline, and I'm very glad that there was the persistent effort by a lot of people to make this happen.
Thank you, John. Any other, Paul?
Sure. Thank you, Bernard. First, Devin, I too want to say thank you for your service. We're going to miss you. You've made my initial joining of the select board very easy. So I thank you for that and all that you've done. Good luck with your new role. We hope you come back.
You're not going to get rid of me that
No,
easily.
there's
Watching.
There's an idea.
And then I would like to mention for the public's benefit that we had moved licensing from public hearings from this committee to a subcommittee, which you helped create and organize, and it's been actually fantastic. But for the public's benefit, this is taking place tomorrow. It happens on Wednesdays. Just about every 2 weeks is our cadence. It'll be at 10 a.m. Hybrid participation. It's on the town calendar, room 111, and across the street. No, it's here.
Yeah, first floor.
First floor, 111. But importantly, this is the opportunity for you to speak during public hearings. So we do common victual licenses, grant of locations where the utilities want to dig up the roads and such. So if you do wish to speak on one of those items, you would want to attend the meeting on Wednesday, tomorrow morning. And these are published every 2 weeks on the calendar. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any Mike?
Sure, I want to join the party as far as Devin's concerned. And Miriam's not here, but I'm sure she would say the same thing. Thank you. And we're all thinking about, when we retire from here, should we move to Chelsea?
Thanks, Mike.
Devin's not a miracle worker. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Chaz?
In addition,
But excuse me, Chelsea's a wonderful community. I didn't
Yeah.
mean any
Phil?
derogatory.
No worries.
in addition to saying goodbye to Devin, I wanted to welcome a new member of the Select Board's team. We are proud to announce the hiring of a communication specialist in our office, shared with the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. Christina Metcalf is joining us from the town of Foxborough most recently, where she was the communications and civic engagement specialist. And while she was there, she did incredible work developing the town's communication policy. Just really a stellar work. She was awarded the first place winner of the annual report contest by the Massachusetts Municipal Association Those of you who have talked to the select board office know that we have been gunning for that for years. We've always been mad when some other town gets it. And so we're going to win it this time. But it's really, really wonderful to have someone who's dedicated to not just communications and the internal aspects of it, but also external communications with the public, communications particularly with harder to reach communities that have not been heard from as part of our broader outreach efforts. So we want to welcome Christina aboard. We want to thank her for joining us. We're really looking forward to working with her in the coming weeks and months as we develop a more robust communications function in the select board office. If you see her around, please say hi.
Thank you. Not seeing any other. Do you want to have your committee make any announcements if you're so inclined? No, that's, I'm just giving people an opportunity to say things. Okay, never mind. So Devin, it's a public comment period. Please lay out the rules.
Thank you for joining us for public comment. This is your opportunity to bring up issues with the select board that matter to you. You will be limited to 3 minutes, and when your time is up, please conclude your remarks. We'll get a verbal warning at 30 seconds. And at the conclusion of the select board's business, there will be an opportunity for an additional 15-minute public comment period if we exceed that time now. This is not a back and forth, but an opportunity for you to share your issues with the select board. And if you need a response in greater detail, you can send an email to selectboard@brooklinema.gov, or we'll work with staff offline to send you a response via email. At this time,
Devin, can I just reemphasize, this is not for comments on the budget.
Oh, it is.
We-
We're going to allow, because it's not technically a public hearing. It's a presentation.
Well, okay,
It's up to you.
I thought we're going to have the comments on the budget when that item comes up.
Oh, okay. We can.
Okay, and right now, people
general public
speak
comment.
about things that are not related to the budget.
Okay. Sorry. I misunderstood.
At this time, there are approximately a dozen attendees in person and 20 joining us virtually. If folks are interested in making a public comment, they can use the hand raise or Q&A feature. And it looks like we're all
Okay.
set.
Okay, let's move to the first item under miscellaneous matters. And that is the question of executing the warrant for the May 5th, 2024 presidential preference primary. I see our town clerk, Ben Kaufman, is at the microphone to sort of introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm honored to play but a small role in Assistant Town Administrator Field's final meeting. We do have an election coming up, March 5th, 2024. Thank you to the chair for mentioning the importance of voting. Already about 3,000 voters have cast their ballots by mail. Early voting will begin this Saturday at Town Hall, as well as at the Putterham Library, Sunday at Town Hall and the Coolidge Corner Library, and then all of next week. So many opportunities to cast your vote. What is before the board is a vote on the warrant for the March 5th presidential primary election. This warrant is exactly the same as the warrant that you voted a couple of weeks ago, with one small correction in the list of polling places. We had copied that list from last year, and we had not updated the name of one of our schools, which is a polling place that had its name changed effective January 1st. So this vote would be to update the polling location for precinct 14 to be at the Roland B. Hayes School at 100 Elliott Street.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the board or comments? Okay, I move approval of the a warrant for the presidential preference primary. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac,
Aye.
Mike Sandman,
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. Okay, and that's the last item on our agenda. And so let's
Right.
get to the real meat of this meeting. Fiscal year 2025 financial plan presentation. As I said earlier, this is a joint public hearing on the fiscal year 2025 financial plan, which is the first iteration of the town's budget. And after the presentation by Town Administrator Carey and Deputy Town Administrator Goff, members of the Select Board and Advisory Committee may ask questions or make comments. Following that, we will take public comments or questions. The Select Board and Advisory Committee have different roles to play in the town's budget. Following hearings held by the Advisory Committee and the Select Board on the financial plan, the Advisory Committee will play the main role in presenting their budget together with any revisions after their hearings to town meeting for consideration and a vote. The role of the Select Board under our bylaws is to, quote, exercise general supervision over all matters affecting the general and financial interests and welfare of the town. This means that the Select Board's role is a little more general than the Advisory Committee's. For fiscal year 2024, the Select Board discussed and developed its goals and objectives during our December and July workshops. The town administrator, the deputy town administrator, and town departments participated in that workshop and presumably incorporated as appropriate those goals and priorities into their budget requests. That is how, our role contributes to the development of the budget. This year, for fiscal year 2025, the process will be a little more formal. After the annual town meeting, the Select Board's general goals and priorities will be discussed at a summer workshop and updated by the Select Board prior to formally presenting our goals and priorities to the town administrator and town departments at the beginning of the budget process in September. The purpose is to inform them of the Select Board's thinking as they prepare their budget request to the town administrator in the fall. Again, this is not our budget, it's the town administrator's financial plan, which is then becomes the Advisory Committee's budget presented to town meeting. Based on the Select Board's goals and objectives and the long-term financial forecast presented last December, the town administrator prepared the financial plan that he's going to present today. It was presented to the Select Board, the Advisory Committee, and sent around to town meeting members on February 15, after which, the plan is to begin our reviews and hearings. This joint meeting is the first of those reviews. So I just want to put this meeting in some context. Dennis, do you have anything you want to add or any thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm Dennis Dowdy, town meeting member from Precinct 3, chair of the advisory committee. And just to add on very briefly to what the chair had said, this is the initial kickoff of the budget cycle from the perspective of the advisory committee. And I thank the Select Board for the last few years for arranging for this joint presentation, which I think has been a very effective way of getting the information collected. What will happen from this point forward is that there will be ample public hearings in subcommittee, the advisory committee subcommittees of each of the departmental budgets, whereupon members of the public will be able to speak. Subcommittee members will ask questions, will engage in depth with department heads, possibly make recommendations for changes to the budget. Over the past few years, we've taken a deep interest in concerns of long-term maintenance, the role of the planning department. We made recommendations to increase funding for the Council on Aging. We've looked into the Veterans Affairs budget. It's very hard to know up front what we will be interested in, but we are always interested in something. And then once that process continues and there are recommendations and votes taken, we will present the budget as our budget to town meeting for a vote in the spring. I'm glad that so many members of the advisory committee were able to participate tonight, and I'm looking forward to hearing their questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Jazz, tell us about your financial plan.
Thank you. And I should say it is not my financial plan. It is the team's financial plan developed with your input, which we are very grateful for, your guidance on the Select Board, and through a large team of staff that have made this happen. Melissa Goff and Charlie Young have just been doing yeoman's work, working long nights and weekends to get this over the finish line. I also want to especially thank Tyler Toller and Nicole Lima on the ARPA team, who did great work both on ARPA specific issues, but also just helping us get this budget over the finish line. So it really was a team effort from the entire group. And the entirety of the Select Board office contributed, both in terms of making sure that regular operations were kept up, and that during that this budget book was complete and presented on time to you as required by statute on February 15th. So thank you to the whole team for making that happen. Thank you to the select board, and thank you to the advisory committee for participating in this and for the vital role you play in developing and presenting the town's budget to town meeting. So let's talk about fiscal year 2025, which begins in July of this calendar year, 2024. We are in year 2 of an override that was set to phase in over a 3-year cycle. You may recall in May of last year, the town voted and approved a significant override of nearly $12 million to supplement the tax levy, to increase the tax levy, so that operations in both town and schools could be augmented and stabilized in the post-pandemic era. Even in year 2 of this process, I would note that budgetary pressure remains due to inflation, cost of utilities, and the cost of collective bargaining agreements. The allocation to the school budget is being made using the historic 60-40 historical share. It's actually 59-41, but it's roughly 60-40. The Driscoll School will come fully online, new Driscoll in FY25. We need to course correct for some of the utility projections, both for the use of that new building and just for the cost of utilities more generally. I do note that the schools presented their initial budget plan first this year in January. Their proposed initial budget allocation is $2.2 million higher than the budget allocation in this budget book based on the town-school partnership split. That will require correction in order for us to all have balanced budgets and come in line. The American Rescue Plan Act will require strategic long-term planning to avoid a budgetary cliff. I will say that we are proud to already be in the process of ensuring that happens. ARPA funds must be obligated by the end of 2024. That has a more formal meaning than it used to. It used to mean that we considered a project obligated, our funds obligated when the select board voted on them. Subsequently, the federal government has said that you must do more than that. You must take concrete steps towards activating those projects. So we need to be very cautious about how we spend our limited ARPA funds so that by the end of this calendar year, everything is obligated, and by the end of 2026, everything is spent. That does mean that there are several things that are now carried on our ARPA budget that will need to come into the operating budget or be reevaluated. For example, our Zoom licenses are ARPA funded. We will need to make sure that those are factored into the operating budget in the coming years. And there are other aspects of that too. For example, our budget analyst positions for ARPA are ARPA funded. We know those positions can be temporary, but we also know the value, and we've seen the value of increased budget capacity. So we want to be sure that we have an understanding of what from the ARPA budget transfers over to the operating budget. We've already had success doing that kind of work with the money that used to come in through host community agreements with with cannabis retailers. Now that those funds are no longer available to us, we are winding down the positions that were funded there or folding them into the general fund. A similar process will happen with ARPA. This total budget balance is $436.3 million of revenues and expenses all in, which represents a 5.9 increase over the last fiscal year. I will reflect, I will refer to the superintendent's budget submission from January with regards to how the school money is proposed to be spent. Our municipal department budget continue to prioritize employee wages. We want to be paying competitive salaries and ensuring that we are in line with our other communities. I'm pleased to report that in the first year of the override plan, over 50% of the positions that were identified as out of alignment with comparable communities are now in alignment. So in the first year of a 3-year plan, we're already more than halfway there, which I think is great. Our capital budget represents 10.9% of prior net year revenue. And when you include debt exclusions, that goes up to 18%. Enterprise funds are up by 4.4%. And reserves and long-term liability met our goals. The goals, remember, are a 10% in unreserved fund balance, which we have, and that we have as well full commitment to full pension funding by 2030, which we are on task to meet. And we are continuing to resume our increased contribution to OPEBs, which is a very important aspect and another outstanding liability that needs to be met over time. Here's the budget at a glance. You can see the total revenues have increased to $436 million, a $24 million change or 5.9%. And similarly, expenditures have increased, obviously, to meet that need, or where possible. You may note initially that expenditures on both town and school sides exceeded those revenue projections and had to be brought in line through minor adjustments on the town side. Here is where the revenues come from. Still in Brookline, 71.5% of our revenue comes from property tax. Only 7.6% come from local receipts. That's, for example, excise taxes, taxes on vehicles, taxes on meals, taxes on hotel rooms. Only 5.6% from state aid. Free cash represents 5.1%. Then you have the enterprise funds, which are kind of out on their own there at 8.6%. And then other available funds, which we'll talk about a little more at 1.6%. So $312 million in property tax revenue represents over 2/3 of the town's overall revenue. Growth is restricted, as you know, to 2.5% annually by so-called Prop 2.5, which was passed in the early 80s, constitutional amendment, plus a specially calculated new figure for new growth, as well as voter overrides and exclusions. So voters have to authorize anything that goes beyond that 2.5 plus the new growth number. The increase here is 14.1 million or 4.7%. And you can see where that's coming from. The 2.5 increase, the new growth, the debt exclusion, the override. You can see that there is levy space, levy capacity this year. That is because we are only in year 2 of the 3-year override. When voters approved the override, they approved increasing the levy by the full amount. But we, as a historic matter of policy, have phased in overrides over a 3-year period. So there will be a further increase to meet the levy cap in year 3 of the override. State aid, 15.9 million, up by only about 350,000 from last year, or 1.4%. We did see an increase. I would note first that this is based on the governor's budget. The governor releases a budget, and then after that, the legislature goes through its own process to develop a budget, a budget that is then presented to the governor for signature once the 2 chambers of the legislature concur. In the governor's budget, unrestricted general government aid, known by the endearing acronym UGA, went up by 3%, which was higher than expected. However, Chapter 70 education aid only increased by 1.3%. Brookline, you may recall, is what's called a minimum aid community, along with 2/3 of the other communities in Massachusetts, which means that we are limited under Chapter 70 to only the minimum amount per pupil, which in the governor's budget is $30 per pupil. Our assessment to the MBTA increased as well, but by lower than last year. Last year was a very significant increase. This year, thankfully, the increase is only 2.4%. Revenues are up. Local receipts are up. This is good news, and we're excited to see it. But we must be cautious to realize that a bump in revenue of this size is not necessarily a new normal, but can reflect one-time expenditures as well. So local receipts were up 10.1%, but recall that's only $33 million, so that's only $3 million more. Marijuana excise taxes decreased. Lodging went up significantly. That was our largest growth, 45%, and meals also grew substantially. Parking meter receipts, we are projecting to grow due to the fee increase voted by the select board. We are increasing meter fees to $2 an hour. Motor vehicle excise, we anticipate to increase as well by 1.6%. There is a bill pending in the legislature to allow localities to increase local option taxes, not substantially, but in a way that will make a significant difference to localities. We are anticipating we are hoping that the legislature looks favorably on that and is able to move that through. That would be a significant benefit to us. But as you can see, right, local receipts are still only a small portion of what our overall revenues are. We will welcome any sort of diversification in tax revenue we can get, however. And so it would be helpful for us, very helpful for us to have the opportunity to consider higher local option taxes. Free cash. Total certified free cash this year is very high in comparison to other years, 25.1 million, of which 22.4 will be used in the budget to meet the town's plan and operating reserves. The remaining balance, you may recall, is left unappropriated to support the goal of 10% of an unreserved fund balance. That is a recommendation in terms of financial management and good practices to ensure that we are maintaining that unreserved fund and therefore our AAA bond rating. So free cash, briefly, for the folks who may be following along, who may be new to this. Free cash represents unappropriated funds from the unspent appropriated funds or unappropriated funds from the previous year. And that can come from any number of things. It could come from receipts in excess of what was anticipated. It can come from accounting issues, for example, money being spent from a different source that's then reimbursed by a grant. The grant comes in, it's basically booked as free cash. It can come from departments running under budget. It can come from better than expected revenues and things like building permits. It can come from investment income. This year, the single largest contributor to our free cash was investment income. If those of you who may have looked at your retirement balances or your investments may have seen that in 2022 numbers went down, and then in 2023 they pretty much rebounded if you were invested directly in the market, if you were in an index fund. And that's what happened to our investments as well. $5 million of that free cash is investment income, and that is much higher than we anticipated. The ordinary past, if you were to try and peg an average of Brookline's free cash, is probably closer to 14 or 15 million. So even though this year and last year were banner numbers, we want to really hammer home for people that this is not a new normal. This does not reflect policies that are leaving money on the table. Instead, this reflects kind of a one-time reflection of how volatile the markets are. We have asked comparable communities about their free cash and what they're seeing in terms of things that are being held out there, and they're seeing similar numbers. So we are not alone in seeing higher than average free cash numbers being realized. But I want to emphasize to folks, because when they see this high number, they say, well, can't we spend that on operating expenses? Brookline does something very prudent. It does not spend free cash on operating expenses. It spends it on one-time things only, one-time investments only, or investments into longer-term things like the pension fund or certain trusts. And the reason for that is to ensure that we have stability and predictability in how our operations run. This is really a product of the work that our predecessors did in the 90s. Rich Kelleher and the team then, Brookline had historically issues when it came to these things, plowing additional revenues into the operating budget and then accidentally incurring shortfalls. That led to all sorts of things like deferred building maintenance, serious operational issues that led to the creation of town school partnership and free cash policy that have led us to this AAA bond rating and real financial stability, which is really a model for other communities. So I just want to be clear, when we talk about free cash, it is not it's not a one size, it's not an anything goes fund. We always joke it's not free and it's not cash, but that is very much kind of how free cash operates. This year, of the $22.1 million, 12.4 will go to the capital improvement plan, $2 million to the stabilization fund, and these are all recommendations, $938,000 to operating reserves, $2.1 million to replenish the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which has fallen below $5 million and is expected to fall further due to an anticipated outlay to the Brookline Housing Authority. $2 million to our pensions, which again, we are aiming to fully satisfy our obligations there by 2030. $1 million to other post-employment benefits. Again, for example, healthcare to retirees. That is filling in more slowly than pensions. We are aiming to hopefully turn to that and satisfy our obligations there once our pensions are fully funded. But that is a longer term process. And so the ability to get a jump on that, spend money now to avoid spending it later while we have that money available to us is helpful. We are proposing an accrued time trust of $1 million. Currently, in both town and schools, I would say it's mostly town, but there are school employees as well. There are folks who have a significant balance of leave and comp time. And when those folks retire or move on from town service and those things are paid out, they can really blow a hole in departmental operating budgets. We want to be prudent about this, and we would really like to do is to avoid situations where we have significant accrual of these things in the future. So a combination of policy on our end in terms of reducing the amount of outstanding time that is out there, encouraging people to spend it, buying it back where appropriate or required. And then on the other hand, putting policies in place to ensure that there are appropriate statutory and policy-related caps in place so that people don't accrue so much that it's then budget destabilizing in the future. And finally, the Injured on Duty Trust, $600,000 there. That tends to impact primarily the public safety unions, but not exclusively. We want to be sure that we have the money necessary to fund where appropriate if individuals are injured on duty. Other available funds, $7 million. We're seeing reimbursements from enterprises for general fund costs. We're seeing tax abatement reserve the tax abatement reserve surplus is being, and we're going to recommend tapping that this year, sending a letter to the assessors to tap that. You may remember that fund, that reserve surplus exists to cover issues with tax collection, over collection, under collection, settlement of tax bills, et cetera. We had a major decision by several landowners, utility landowners, not to contest the valuation of some of the property for the assessment of some of the property for tax purposes. And that has led to money that we have been holding for some time in that fund now being able to be certified as an overage. So we would certify $3 million of that for an overage if the assessors agree when we make the formal request. And then our regular transfer from the host community agreement stabilization fund. Again, host community agreements have been modified. Those payments are no longer being made. We are drawing down on those funds. There will be $574,000 this year, which preserves current field positions and ramps down spending, as well as transferring those positions to the general fund gradually. Again, the same sort of thing we'll be doing with ARPA over the next 3 years. Let's talk about where our expenditures are. School department expenditures are the largest by not by much. Shared non-departmental expenses are at 31.1%, and municipal departments make up 21.7%. And you have the enterprises again. Recall that it's net, enterprises in, enterprises out, so it's the same number, 8.6. So-called special appropriations, which we can talk about, and non-appropriate expenses, which we can talk about in a little more detail. Again, the school budget is up by 4.4% following the town school partnership formula. There is approximately $1 million in shared costs assessed to the schools, primarily adjusting for increased utility costs and repair and maintenance. Override funds and group health savings from a reset base were directed toward the schools. You may recall last year, our group health expenses were projected to go up 8%, but because a number of healthcare companies consolidated, folks actually moved on to cheaper plans, even though the overall cost of the total plans went up by an average of 8%. So we realized some savings there, which we passed along to the schools as a shared expense. Municipal departments, there's a growth of 4.5%, covers fixed costs and contractual increases, prioritizes a reserve for salary and wage increases. This year, all of the collective bargaining agreements that we operate under, except for the one with the police department, will expire. And we will begin negotiations for new successor agreements. We tend to run on a 3-year cycle. The police department agreement has already expired. It's lagging a year behind the others. And so we are in the process of negotiations there as well. So this budget does include significant amount of money for collective bargaining with the anticipation that we will have an across the board 2% cost of living adjustment upward for both union and non-union employees. Again, we offer that in lockstep to all employees. That is 1% lower than last year, which was at 3%. It does reflect the more difficult financial situation for the town, but also the need to fund our staff at an appropriate level, given the rate of inflation. We want to be sure that we are providing adequate funding to our employees. And so even though it puts us in a tight financial situation, 2% cost of living is what we're recommending here. This does include a number of year 2 override initiatives. The building department reorganization is continuing. The Council on Aging age-friendly services processes are continuing to ramp up. I'm very excited to see what Ruth Ann and her team have been working on. We've just been in regular discussion in terms of how the Council on Aging and the Senior Center have been expanding their activities. It was a great success to have the social worker salaries increased to parity with other communities, which was a great benefit to our senior center. We are restoring areas of the budget that were cut during COVID. And as mentioned, we have increased salaries out of alignment. Now over 50% of the positions have been adjusted. We are implementing the DICR language access plan. We are hiring a language access coordinator and implementing that plan beginning this year. The urban forestry master plan, developing and implementing that. Town council's office will have increased investigation capacity. Over the years, the number of investigations that have been required to be conducted just by virtue of, I think a shift in behavior and the use of policies and procedures has resulted in pretty significant requirements of HR, legal, and other departments in terms of an investigative function. We want to create a dedicated position for that, install it in town council's office, have that person be available to conduct all the required impartial hearings and so forth that may be necessary and conduct investigations on a regular basis so that there is the systemic risk to the town is reduced. We continue to see higher than expected fire overtime. We know that was a concern of the advisory committees last year when seeking a reserve fund transfer. Accordingly, we are in a process of gradually increasing the fire overtime budget year over year. And finally, bringing on to the into the general fund a MOA with BIG for the hybrid services that they are providing us now as part of this meeting and as part of other meetings that they televise and carry. Thank you to BIG. We're very grateful for that. It's one of the Devon's signature achievements that we're going to be leaving us with is a great agreement with BIG. So thank you both to BIG and to Devon for working that through. A brief update on the override. There are 2.8 million in override funds in FY25, of which $375,000 goes to the town, 1.753 to the schools, and $750,000 to the CIP. You can see that how this works with the revenue of the override funds and how that comes in over the 3-year period. Where are our budgets growing? Where are our departmental budgets growing? You can see here in the building department, we are increasing deferred maintenance payments. We are continuing to reorganize the building department. We have reorganized at the highest level. We now have director of public buildings, a deputy director of public buildings. We have director of inspectional services. We are moving into a model that more closely resembles the town of Wellesley. We've already seen success in how that's being worked out, and we want to continue to implement that in year 2. We continue to have that age-friendly services with that additional half FTE. The language access plan, urban forestry is mentioned. We have more for highway and line painting. We have more for position reclassification in public works. We're looking to, obviously, as you can see with the fire department, increase overtime, incident command training, have that paralegal investigator, continue to have increase in long-term planning capacity in the planning department, moving a CDBG funded position to the general fund. And then you can see the school department override budget growth there as well. So that's where the departments are growing. On the town side, where are budget reductions being made to meet the revenue shortfall? We are seeing some savings and reorganization from HVAC services. We are redefining that position to ensure that we can bring folks on. We should realize most of the savings there will be realized by the schools since they utilize that more often than we do, but we will see on the town side some savings. The rest of the reductions are mostly in general consulting or technical services. You will see, obviously, on the police department side, the patrol officers. Last year, 3 positions were held open. This year, that number is increased by 1. They were held open at 3 positions last year to meet the obligations of the previous collective bargaining agreement. We anticipate, in the hopes of reaching a collective bargaining agreement with the police union this year for ongoing plan to build that out accordingly. But in order to fund the level of contract that we expect to reach, we need to organize the department accordingly. It is a tough balance. It is something that we continue to work on getting that number right. But it is difficult to provide both the level of funding necessary for a collective bargaining agreement and maintain a roster of over 130 positions, especially when, a number of positions are open. I will say the chief pastor has done tremendous work in terms of recruitment and retention. We are already in a much better place than we were last year. Even with, on the books, 18 open positions, those positions are filling. We have a number of people in the academy. We have people continually expressing interest in Brookline. We've had 2 officers return to Brookline. So we are really seeing the benefit of chief pastor's leadership, full command staff, and the efforts that have been placed there to ensure that police department is an attractive place for folks to work. So that's where the budget reductions are being made to fund those collective bargaining efforts. Non-departmental expenditures. Unfortunately, we are seeing another larger group health increase this year. We see a 10% rate increase. We will know the final rates in March, but we don't anticipate them being lower than 10%. If anything, we're worried that they might be slightly higher. We do project slightly increased enrollment as new employees come on board as well. And unlike last year, where we had the unexpected benefit of having plan consolidation, there will be no plan consolidation this year. We will have to absorb the full cost of the rate increase. Pension funding. Our rate of investment return is down to a more realistic 6.9%. Again, we are on track for that full funding date of 2030. $2 million of funding of free cash this year really goes a long way towards that. Again, with OPEBs, the rate of investment return needs to come, the assumption needs to come down. 6.9% is still robust, but it's lower than it was, and it reflects where the market is and builds in market uncertainty. The contribution of an increased contribution of $250,000 continues, and we have that additional $1 million in funding from free cash. Again, the money that we spend now to pay this down is money that we don't have to spend later. While we have this money from this annual free cash here, investing it in long-term liabilities like this looks really good to ratings agencies. It projects strength and makes sure that we are covering these underfunded liabilities. Debt service and special appropriations. The revenue finance capital budget this year is $21.5 million, of which 6.1 comes from general operating revenue, 12.4, so more than double from free cash, and 3 million from that the overlay, the excess from the overlay. Our debt service is increasing by almost $1 million, 2.2%. Total capital expenses are now 11.2% of our prior year net revenue, and that exceeds our target of 7.5%. We remain a capital heavy community. And that increases to 18% when you include excluded debt that the voters authorized to be borne by their taxes. So I will say over the last, I think, 20 years, Brookline has spent $500 million on capital improvements. It is a remarkably large number. And the work, the proof is really in the success. Very few Brookline projects have run over budget, and that's a real tribute to the teams, the capital teams in the buildings department, the Department of Public Works, everywhere. And I want to thank many of the folks who have made that possible, particularly the folks that have retired, Tony and Ray, and the whole team that have really made this what it is. And we want to welcome our new Director of Capital Projects, Lap Yan, who's doing great work and stepping into Tony's big shoes, making sure that our projects run on time, on budget, and effectively. Non-appropriated expenses, again, that MBTA assessment, our assessment to Norfolk County, which is $1.2 million. And as we take money out of the overlay, money goes into the overlay, $2 million this year. Enterprises see a 4.4% growth because of an increase in the MWRA assessment. We do see growth in the golf enterprise, thankfully, from the driving range. Again, we want to thank Justin Lawson and his team. Really just a bright spot, many bright spots in town government, the efforts being done and rec more broadly, but in golf and golf enterprise in particular. Let's talk policy and issues and initiatives. The select board, as the chair noted, is really dedicated to long-term strategic planning and using the time that we have freed up for operational efficiencies to be more actively involved in setting goals and identifying metrics of success. So the select board this year aims to build on the workshop model to set both yearly and longer-term goals for the community through strategic planning processes. Departments in turn will take those goals and initiatives and identify both quantitative and qualitative metrics to identify success. How do we know something is working? We need to understand what success looks like and be able to report back on that success. In terms of sustainable economic development, we are beginning the comprehensive planning process in earnest. That is a 3-year commitment. It's very exciting. Brookline has not done a comp plan in 20 years. And it really is a reflection on a high level reflection of what the community wants to look like, what its neighborhoods are, how it intends to develop in the mid to long term. It's not a substitute for zoning reform. It's not a substitute for project by project planning, but it is a guidepost and a lodestar. I guess you could say lodestar, that's fine. You could, a guiding star, if you will, for ensuring that our individual projects meet a broader sort of vision for the community. We continue to identify and study potential redevelopment targets. The Chestnut Hill West study is in progress. Fisher Hill West, Newberry College will begin this year. Although again, I want to remind folks that Newberry College's current use is for temporary space for the Pierce School, and actual work in that space is not due to begin until that project concludes and students are out of there. So I just want to be sure that people understand that while the planning process will begin, we're not actually aiming to break ground on new things probably until the Pierce project is complete in 2028 or 29. And we want to attract business growth through outreach and cooperation. It's crucial that Brookline be an effective place to work, a nice place to work, a place where people who can afford to both live and work here. The planning department, and particularly the economic development team, has done stellar work in inviting businesses in, hearing business owners' needs, hearing the needs of commercial landlords and tenants. And we expect that to continue in FY25 with initiatives ranging from the pop-up store in JFK Crossing, which I strongly encourage you to visit, to broader, longer-term issues. We continue to hope for the development, for example, of a Coolidge Corner Business Improvement District. All of those things will continue to progress in 2025. Housing affordability and preservation. We continue to operationalize the Housing Stability Office that town meeting created in the spring. It is a key priority for us. We're looking forward actually in the coming weeks to launching phase 2 of the Housing Stability Office's operations, which will include a reporting system that will allow folks to be routed to where appropriate, the right department or potential outside partner who may be able to help them with the issues that they've identified. The Attorney General approved, I believe 2 weeks ago, the MBTA CA compliance plan that is still pending approval with the EOHLC. Once that's all complete, obviously we will then implement that zoning. We see that as a long-term process. We don't anticipate people coming in right away. That was the point of the project, is not to incentivize sudden development, but gradual growth. We will fund the Affordable Housing Trust to allow for more major projects, including in that large-scale BHA project, to move forward. And we will fund a new pilot rental assistance program through the Affordable Housing Trust, subject to the caveats identified by the Select Board. We are moving through that process now. One of the big initiatives of this year that's going to bear fruit in the new fiscal year is the creation of a whole new division within DPW, the Sustainability Division. No longer is one person going to be responsible for the entirety of the town's sustainability portfolio. There will be a whole division responsible for it, and it will be located within an operational department. It will be well integrated within that department, and it will be able to provide the guidance necessary to our internal staff on how to comply and develop, an appropriate climate action plan, while also communicating with the public. We will continue to roll out the fossil fuel-free building code. John and I said the first day is today. It's very exciting. We will develop and implement the urban forestry master plan with our override funds, and we will continue stormwater mitigation activities. Stormwater mitigation remains a key priority for me. It's something that keeps me up at night, honestly, with the increased rainfall and the lack of snowfall that we're seeing in the winter. It's a serious hazard, and we continue to evaluate and budget appropriately to ensure that we are on top of it. Transportation. This is the highest funding in a budget for road projects in recent memory, thanks to both the override and free cash. The Select Board has identified an interest in rebalancing the ratio of maintenance and upkeep of roads. A baseline repaving, even if there may be a need to do it again in 5 years, just because of the risk of failure, versus transformative complete streets projects. We obviously want to do both. We want to get the ratio of those right, though. We hear from the community their concerns that looking at the big things only means that the small things don't get done, and we want to respond to that accordingly. We continue multimodal transportation and adaptation efforts, including bus and bike lanes as appropriate and with community input. And we want to ensure accessibility and options for senior-friendly transportation, which again is a work that is happening at the Council on Aging, as well as within DPW and the Transportation Division. With social services, the big community needs assessment will conclude this year. I'm very excited for that, because what that does is that is effectively the second half of the, I said the community needs assessment. I meant the community inventory. The community needs assessment is complete. The community inventory of available services is what we are completing now. Those two items together form the core of the ability for us to develop a case management driven strategy. We need to holistically address people's issues as we see them. When we focus on the problem rather than the whole person, we run the risk that the problem will recur. And so we need to be thinking about social services as a people-based model. And that's going to require, knowing what's out there and identifying community partners to assist us where the government cannot. Streamlining and strengthening good government. I'm very excited to say on the Road and Control Action Plan, When you compare January of last year with January of this year, there's a 40% decrease in calls. Very exciting, but it means we still have ways to go. That's not no calls. Rats are still a problem. We really need the help of the public to get us to a more sustainable level. We are using those override funds judiciously, not just to fund pest control, but to fund outreach and enforcement and all the things necessary. We are, we're doing our level best to keep up with the flow of trash into municipal waste, but we need private folks to follow through as well. Every business should have a pest control plan in place, trash management plan in place. Every business should be following that plan. And large-scale construction projects, if you're disturbing areas that may have rodent activity, even individual homeowners, if you're not securing your trash, everyone's got to pitch in on this. We are doing our best. We continue to welcome your comments and questions and concerns, but it really does take a team. It takes the whole town to bring this down. So we want to just thank you for all the work you've done so far and encourage you to keep it up. Please don't be the weak link in the rodent control action plan. We continue salary reevaluation as mentioned, the building department reorg funded with the override. Paul mentioned the licensing panel operations. Those have really freed up select board time and efforts. They've been great. We've gotten positive feedback from businesses and from their council who really appreciate being able to come in during the regular business day, particularly for restaurants when they're not operating. They're able to come in and do this kind of work, get the questions out of the way. If there are issues that need to be escalated to the select board, they are. And if they're not, they're able to come through on the miscellaneous agenda. It's my hope to expand those operations. There have been discussion, for example, of expanding them out to noise bylaw waiver hearings. We'll discuss that with the select board in the coming year. We're very thrilled with our disadvantaged business enterprise disparity study when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a real bright spot, in part because it's a community partnership. We are very thrilled to have partnership with Somerville, City of Somerville, to finish this. We anticipate finishing it this year. And what that will hopefully allow us to do, even in a revised and more limited legal environment, is to provide some benefit to historically disadvantaged business enterprises. I heard when I met with, small contractors who have historically been locked out because they've been from, communities that just didn't get contracts in the past years, how eager they are to find work in communities like Brookline and how hard it has been for them. So anything we can do to lower the barriers to entry and ensure that our contractors and particularly our subcontractors reflect the diversity of our community is important. As mentioned, we're launching the language access plan, and we're going to use that new communications position in the select board office, Christina's new position, to expand outreach to historically marginalized communities. I wanted to note it didn't fit comfortably in any category, but I wanted to specifically shout out to the health department, the regional health partnership that is now underway between and with us and 3 other communities. It is a major accomplishment for Sigal and her team. We're very grateful for the efforts that they have undertaken to make that happen. That really provides data and resource sharing and will allow us to be better prepared for any sort of health issues that we see down the line, whether that is just quality of life or, heaven forbid, another major event like a pandemic. American Recovery Plan Act, ARPA. The select board approved over $10 million in projects for round 2, including rental assistance, affordable housing, mental health, food access, continuation of our services, transportation, you name it. It was a great success. We're very grateful for the panels, the board, the panel's participation in that, for the community's participation in that. We will say, however, this is the end of the line. All community ARPA projects have an end date, a target end date of June of this year. There are community projects that will likely extend out past then, but even then, June of this year is the deadline to make sure that we are on track to fully expend all of your ARPA funds by the statutory mandated deadline. If that goal is not going to be met, that money has to come back to the town to be reallocated. I know that is difficult. I know that for many of these organizations who have been first-time recipients of federal funds, that the reporting requirements have been difficult. We have tried to provide support wherever we can. We've added Nicole Lima's position in order to ensure that we have the capacity to do this. But the reality of the situation is there is a firm deadline on this, and whether it is town departments are subject to the same deadline, or our community subrecipients. If those deadlines are not met, then the money has to come back into the town's coffers and has to be reallocated. And it needs to be reallocated for internal, discrete, one-time, shovel-ready projects. So if there is a so-called ARPA round 3, it is not going to be an outward-facing thing because we don't have the time to set up subrecipient agreements and monitor outside folks. Unfortunately, it has to be done in-house. And so our recommendation to the select board will be, if there is any money left over from projects that didn't complete, that one, it be used to supplement the budgets of projects where the cost of inflation has increased them, particularly, for example, some of the capital projects that were identified, the electrification and HVAC upgrades in the public health building and the senior center, for example, or for one-time smaller scale town projects that meet the ARPA requirements. And that is the end of my section of the presentation. And now I will turn it over to the person who is responsible for the vast majority of this, Melissa Goff, and as well Charlie Young. And I want to thank again the select board and the advisory committee for your time. And I will be up there to answer questions when the presentation concludes.
Chaz. I also want to echo the words of thanks both to Charlie Young and also to Lincoln Heineman and Kara Bruton, who also were very helpful with the CIP and just the general debt management plan. And also want to thank the department heads as well. You know, their participation in the budget process is essential as we work through all of the changes there. So a lot of what I have going forward is the blizzard of numbers that's really hard to read, especially if you're here in the hearing room today. But a lot of this is going to be posted online tomorrow in Budget Central. You know, we're still making some tweaks. I've already noticed a couple of tweaks that I want to make. So tomorrow, this presentation will be on the town's website under Budget Central. So this is just, you know, if you can't read it tonight, you can just look at it tomorrow or, you know, at your leisure. And, you know, we'll be talking further and diving in detail with the advisory committee as we go through the public hearing process. So this is the overall financial plan where you have your total revenue and your appropriations, and then you have your water and sewer transfers that provide the total benefits. So you can see the components of the 5.9% increase. So we have our fully allocated budget. Now, this is something that we talk about a lot with the advisory committee. You know, that pie chart that was in Chaz's earlier section of the presentation showed, I think it was something around 34% of the school budget. But we know that there are more expenditures that we provide services on behalf of the town for school related programs. So for example, we have crossing guards in the police department. We take care of the grounds in the Park and Open Space Division. So we take an exercise of where we report on these expenses at the end of the year, and we try and project that into the next year budget. And so when you do that, we're estimating we're closer to about 59.2% for education related services in the budget. And for advisory committee members, I know that this is something we talk about a lot. So we did create a new section in under section 2, I believe. We have more detail on the town school split, kind of giving a little bit more flavor on the components that make up some of these categories as well as the detail that we provide as part of the end of the year report. So the next chart is another summary of our general fund budget, where you can see our total revenue of 22.5. Then you deduct our non-appropriated expenses, so our county charges, our overlay. Then you have what's available for appropriation. So with the changes in the non-appropriated amounts, we have 6.4% or 23.26 to allocate between town, school budgets, and then other non-departmental budgets. Then you add on to that your revenue financed CIP, your special appropriations. And so that's how you get your fully loaded budget for your 6.4%. This shows the changes in local receipts. Chaz already went through this in the revenue part of his presentation, but you can see where the growth of the 3 million comes from. So local option taxes being one of the big ones, and then under departmental another, that's where you'll find the parking meter receipts. Slight changes in other categories like motor vehicle excise and parking court fines. And section 3 in the financial plan is a full description of all the changes in the budget, and there is a special section for local receipts. So free cash, we talked about earlier in the presentation as well. So just kind of going through as the policy requirements for free cash certified at a little over $25 million. Our target for our operating reserve is 1% of prior year net revenue, and 25% of that number is coming from free cash. So that's the $811,000 number. We typically leave $2.7 million unappropriated in case we have a severe emergency during the course of the year. And then we're also looking to put $2 million in the stabilization fund. At a presentation earlier, I did have someone ask the question, well, if we're at 10%, why do we need to keep putting money into the stabilization fund? And I would say that the 10% is really more of a floor. We did have our ratings call last week, Lincoln and I, and, we were definitely getting indications that we should keep putting money towards our undesignated fund balance. They're really looking to see even higher than 10% for that target. The next thing that we do is look at the balance in our liability fund. For the most part, we are self-insured with the exception of some building insurance that we have. And then obviously our fire trucks are pretty large. So we do have insurance for that. And the rest is primarily carried through the liability reserve, and that target is 1% of prior year net revenue. So in order to meet that target, we need another $127,000 to keep that target. Then we have a capital improvement program, and we have a free cash policy that says use free cash to get to 7.5% of prior year net revenue. So in order to meet that target, we need $4.8 million. So there's a new line in this waterfall chart that reflects a one-time event that happened in fiscal 23. So advisory committee members might remember that we created a stabilization fund for the opioid funds that we will be getting from all the settlements from all the drug companies. Unfortunately, the fund is only effective in fiscal 24. So as the money was coming in 23, it fell to free cash. We only appropriated about $64,000. And so $304,000 was additionally what came in during fiscal 23. We are only allowed to spend that on opioid related expenses. So we need to kind of allocate that as part of this free cash allocation. Then we have the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So what the policy asks us to do is look at the balance in the fund. If it's less than $5 million, 15% of whatever is left after we've satisfied the first 4 buckets would then go to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So that provides $2.1 million, which I think Kara is extremely excited about. I think she's, hopeful that that will help kind of the timeline of some projects that they already know that they have in the queue. Once all of those obligations are satisfied, we've got $12.1 million left still to allocate. And so we have what we call special use. And so these are for things that are one-time in nature. A lot of times what we do is we revisit the CIP. Obviously, we have a ton of CIP requests that, we can't satisfy everything, but we try and do what we can with what we have. So these are the buckets. Chaz talked about a lot of them during his piece of the presentation. So you can see we are looking to support the pension and OPEB funding because we really want to make sure that we're still on course for the 2030 funding for pensions, and OPEBs is just such a big liability. To the extent that we can put more money there, that's great. We have the additional CIP money, and then we also have the accrued time trust fund that Chaz talked about earlier, and then our engine on duty trust fund. We're looking to kind of just support that appropriation a little bit further. So this is our projection for fund balance. We are currently a little above 10%. We're anticipating that we need 4.7 to keep us in a good place. Obviously, knowing that our revenue is going to be growing from the override years 2 and 3, we still feel that it's prudent to put money in the stabilization fund. And so these are the projections for the out years, given the commitments that we currently have for free cash. These are the areas of growth in the budget. So benefits is growing by $9.3 million. A lot of that has to do with some of these funds that we are providing additionally to the benefit items. So $2 million for pensions, $1 million for OPEBs, IOD trust. These are all things that are part of that $9.3 million. Then you have your school budget, your town budgets, your CIP coming in next, both revenue financed and money that's coming from the operating budget as well. So this is just some information on our pensions, where our schedule is set for the next, or for this year and for fiscal 25, which puts us on pace for 2030. We are hoping that when we have our next valuation, which should be coming probably this summer, I would think, that hopefully we can stay on track. 7.85% increases every year are still a lot to swallow. So we're really hoping that we can hold steady with the annual increases. And that's part of the motivation behind putting the $2 million of free cash into the pensions. And then we have our OPEBs. This just shows the funding. So primarily, we've been growing our OPEB contributions by adding $250,000 annually from our operating budget. And now we have $1 million additional in free cash to add to that as well. This is just a snapshot that shows some of the changes, both in revenue and expenditures. So you can see kind of a high level display of where the bulk of the increases are coming, similar to the bar chart that was presented earlier. Charlie, I'm going to have him cover the next few slides so he can talk about the water and sewer enterprise, golf, and rec revolving funds. Thanks, Charlie.
Hey, folks. Melissa, just remember to stay right there so you can flop the slides over for me. Thanks for letting me join you remotely. I'm Charlie. I'm the Assistant Town Administrator for Finance, and just want to echo Melissa's thanks to our staff in our department that very much contributed to getting this budget across the finish line, and thanks to the department heads for their work closely with me throughout the budget season getting this together. So this is the first of the town's two enterprise funds, our business-like activities, the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund within the DPW. We're showing an overall increase of 3%. This breaks down into a few different ways. Largely, the costs and salaries include absorbing an environmental engineer from the engineering department in order to make space for a new assistant director of engineering on that side. And then there are significant increases in services and other and supplies costs relative to increased need for DigSafe. There have been many more DigSafe requests in recent years, and also a significant increase in our MWRA assessment, which are partly being offset by the same group health savings we've identified elsewhere, and resetting the base there. So overall, a 3% increase, which stays relatively on target with the average increase in rates that the Water Department presented at its last rate setting hearing with the Select Board of no more than 3% on average. And so they'll be coming back to talk to you more about that at some point. And within this budget, the Water Department continues to search for ways to provide relief for low-income seniors. So that's water and sewer. And so the Golf Course Enterprise Fund is the second of the two business-like activities we do here in town. The golf course within the Recreation Department we're looking at an overall increase of 9%. And part of this is due to several initiatives by the golf course to increase revenues. Some of those involve increasing fees for non-residents by up to 10%, which I believe might be going into effect this year. Also looking at earlier tee times. And all of this is really intended to help drive improvements to the golf course and drive continual maintenance to the golf course. And we are looking at, there is a piece in the CIP for the golf course this year for golf course improvements of $600,000. A lot of the new revenue is going towards those new costs for course improvements and maintenance, as well as increased costs for seasonal labor. We can do revolving. Revolving fund, slightly more modest increase of 4%. The recreation revolving fund is self-supported by program costs. And it's adding some programs back into the budget this year at Tappan and at the Soleil Gym, which is great to see. Some of that is returned from pre-COVID times, but some of it is also new vendor programming, and of course, as well as with golf, the increase in temporary and part-time salary costs.
Thanks, Charlie. Another component of the financial plan is our capital improvement program. So we have over the 5 years of the plan, $182 million, on average $30 million a year. We really did, hear the messaging from the Select Board at the retreat on the need to really focus on deferred maintenance. So really happy to say that, we've got this school repair and maintenance funding. Last year, we were able to fund $1 million of repair and maintenance. This year, $4.67 million. And that is directly related to the money that we're pulling out of the overlay. That's really helping to help boost that account. Also, knowing that we have override funds for street rehabilitation, still hearing that that may not be enough. So we, really took this free cash allocation and really wanted to make sure that we met the need with street rehab. So we've got almost $6 million for street rehab. And then we also have, a lot of a traffic signal project in the CIP for transportation. And then we do have funding for bike improvements and traffic calming and sidewalk repair as well. So a lot of good transportation related CIP items. So, when we have our combination of operating revenue, which is the 6% policy, added free cash to that, we are looking at $11.2 million as a percentage of prior year net revenue. And then when you throw the debt exclusions into the equation, we're at 18%. So this is an overall summary of the components of the CIP and how we calculate prior year net revenue. And this is also in section 7 of the budget book. It shows you how the 6% policy works. We also added override funds to that 6% policy. So it's really 6% plus $1.4 million for the CIP. And then how free cash gets added to that equation, and then the overlay surplus as well. These are some of the projects that we have coming in both in the near term and in the out years of the CIP. Davis Path Footbridge was something that we were excited about last year to be able to put into the plan, and it's kind of marching along. It's in fiscal 27. We have additional funding for school rehab and upgrades. So overall, we're looking at $7.2 million. If we have another strong free cash year, obviously that's an area that will continue to look. The Hammond Street, Woodland Road traffic signal. I know that I just recently talked to Janice Kahn, and they've been very excited to see this project come into the CIP. So happy to say that it's in fiscal 25. So I'm sure that the neighborhood will be very happy to see that progressing. Washington Street is another major project that we are looking to get on the TIP, which is the State Transportation Program. And so that we're anticipating that will happen in fiscal 27. So that's $33.4 million, both a combination of town and state funds. Then we have Schick Playground at $2 million. That was last year, $2 million in fiscal 24. And then we have our body worn in-car camera. We had funded money in fiscal 24. Then we got a state grant for a piece of it. And now we have a contract that we're ready to move forward with. And the fiscal 25 allocation provides the full funding for those components of the body cam program. So then the last piece is our overall financial plan. And if you look in the budget message section, it talks about the assumptions that we make in the budget, both for collective bargaining, for group health, for new growth in the revenue. And within that, we kind of try to project out, what that means for both town and schools. And, our challenge every year, we continually have a gap because we have revenues growing at a slower pace than our expenditures. And, we are every year trying to make sure that we can close that gap with a combination of revenue enhancements, things like the parking meters, and then expenditure reductions. And you've seen the list of the reductions that we've made on the town side to come into balance. So with that, we still do have some pressure in the out years. You can see our current projections still show deficits 26 through 29. And so, we'll be working both with the board and with the advisory committee on, strategies and challenges and ways that we can reduce that gap. And part of that is kind of, engaging with these departmental budget meetings so people can understand the constraints that we have and the, the pressures and the way that we're trying to close the gap. And this just shows the overall growth, kind of both for projected annual growth and then just rolling it up cumulatively. Knowing that we're required to balance a budget every year, these, it kind of compounds the way that it looks, but it just shows the ongoing pressure that we experience just by nature of revenues not growing as fast as expenditures. So that's the last piece of the presentation itself. And Chaz and I and Charlie and Lincoln are all here if there are questions that both the advisory committee and the select board have.
Okay, thank you. Any question? I see Mike is itching to ask a question.
Well,
Start off.
I'll start with one anyway. I've got a few. So first of all, just a comment that I would still love to see non-departmental expenses allocated between town and schools explicitly rather than sort of after the fact. Something that you and I have been talking about for a long time. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm greatly appreciative of the increase, the strong bump in school maintenance funding. And my question is that enough to begin to catch up, or are we treading water with that?
No, I think we're making significant progress in that regard. The school department this summer and with Susan Gibbons starting there, really took a hard look at the list. And the list was definitely larger than what was actually the need. So they did a lot of scrubbing. They reduced. So their current, I believe their current outstanding list is around $13 million. So we've got 7 in the plan right now. So we think that makes a really good dent in what their need is. And, you know, obviously we'll continue to engage with them as we kind of tackle these projects and look to provide more support for them.
Okay. I've got a couple others, but I don't want to hog the.
Should we let the advisory committee have a turn, or what's your?
What do you, anyone on the select board?
I've got questions, but I'm also just,
Okay.
thinking about.
Well, let's go through this select board for a series of questions and then go to the advisory committee.
Okay,
Do you want to do yours?
sure. Thank you very much. Thank you to all who presented. This was at the top of budget presentations in my experience on the select board. It was really thorough, and it reflected a lot of response to discussions that the select board has had over the past year and maybe even beyond that, as to how we can match priorities to the allocation of funds in the budget, but beyond that, to also match the allocation of funds in the budget to measurable goals that could be achieved within the next year. So I'll cite one. Personal preference, I'm delighted that there is more funding for street maintenance. I would love for there to be a published list of the streets that will be addressed with the funding that is put into the budget for us to do catch up on street maintenance. Maybe that's, asking a lot, but I think it would give people who have been waiting for the town to be more responsive to the condition of streets the reassurance that we're not just putting money into a budget, we're actually rolling out a plan which will prioritize the streets that are in the worst condition, and then the next worst, and the next worst, and the next worst, and so on. The other thing I want to highlight is the question of full-time employees and the amount by which they have increased in this budget. And there are numbers in the budget, they're helpful numbers, but at the same time, I still find myself with questions. There is a substantial number increase in the schools. And I don't want to lean too heavily on schools questions, but it is by far the largest increase of personnel in these budgets. And part of it is that there were 150 positions that were funded through grants and revolving funds in FY24. And then all of a sudden that disappears in FY25. I'm a little bit mystified by that. It seems to me they must have been moved to general fund, but I'm not sure why. At any rate, the net impact in terms of the FY25 full-time positions in the schools budget versus the FY24 number of positions is an increase of nearly 70 employees. And we're talking about a year in which there has not been any kind of a substantial increase or projected increase in enrollment. So that's a big question that I'd like to see addressed a bit in the future. And then I think it would be helpful, and again, it would sort of address average citizens and their confidence in how this budget plays out in terms of positions. If we could see not just the number of positions and not just in which departments, but if we could see this expressed in terms of what will be the new hires in this fiscal year 25, in which departments, and what are the additional duties that will be performed by the new hires, department by department. So I'll just lay that out there. I'm not really looking for answers right now. If anybody wants to react, of course, please feel free to do so.
Sure, I can, oh, Charlie?
Charlie's. gonna
Okay,
get it.
Charlie he works really hard on the FTE table, so I think he's probably got the nitty-gritty answer you're looking for.
Great.
Hi, John. So I think you're raising a very good point, which is that we just didn't have the same FTE data in the initial budget that the schools put out this year that they usually put out in their budgets, which might just be due to a change in format. They did have grant funded FTEs, but it was by program instead of summarized total, total general fund versus total grant funded. So I would take that with a grain of salt for now until we get the actual budget from the schools and we can ask them that question. What is the total breakdown? I just wanted to make sure we had the total count of school FTEs, which I do see that the total count of school FTEs is going up notably, even so, by something like 60 FTEs looking at the total last year and the total this year. But as to the breakout of how many of those are grant funded or not, I'm not sure we have the best data for that to be able to make that judgment call right now. So I will also say that as far as town FTE growth, if you look in the budget message section, and we did put up a slide earlier that had some of this info, under expenditures, there is a chart that shows growth in town departments. And that chart includes new FTEs added within the FY25 budget. And there are only, by my count, and one of them should have listed, say, one FTE on them, but only 1.88 FTEs in there. One is a paralegal investigator in town council. There's a half of an FTE going into the Council on Aging for a social worker position. And we are partially funding a position that was on CDBG funds with general fund dollars this year to maintain the service that's being provided there. So you will see that there's a jump in FTEs in the total count of FTEs for the town in the budget book. Part of that has to do with recognizing some positions that are grant funded that were not recognized in previous years. So would love to chat with you more about this, John, and get you a good picture of the FTE growth and changes, but it should only be 1.88 FTE new true general funded FTEs.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you, Bernard. And I want to thank John for his comments, and I'm going to follow on and mention roadways. So the number one issue that I hear from constituents across Brookline, whether it's people that are walking, biking, driving, just trying to navigate our roadways, is that they're in generally atrocious shape. This is the number one issue that I hear on a regular basis. I've polled voters. I've gotten extensive feedback on this issue. This is the number one issue that I hear about. So while I appreciate I think 5.9 or whatever the amount of money is that we're putting in to roadways, I'm not convinced it's enough. I suspect it's not enough.
So just for a little bit of history, if
Yep.
we didn't have the override funds and a strong free cash year, that number would have been 1.98.
Yep, which is abysmal, which actually makes my point. I think that we haven't been investing in the roadways for quite some time. So the reason why I bring this up is there's two issues. Certainly funding is an issue, but I also think there's a policy issue in the way. But let's speak about the funding for a moment. We have a free cash waterfall policy that allocates $250,000 to OPEDs. It's part of a program in order to have us get caught up at a certain amount of time. It's been in place for a while, and we've been doing it consistently. I'm not convinced $1 million towards OPEBs is the best use of those funds at this time. if we get ahead of OPEBs, I assume there's a return on investment in doing that by being free at some point and caught up. But we do know that if we allow a roadway to deteriorate to the point where you can no longer just resurface it, but you need to dig it up, that is a quantum leap in expense. So I guess I'm asking to reconsider the $1 million increase in allocation above the 250, which we're already doing, and reconsider that for a better use. And I would strongly encourage that it be put into something that is near-term maintenance. I think roadways would be a good candidate. Other building maintenance would be a good candidate. Sidewalks would be a good candidate. Pedestrian street lighting would be a good candidate. But I'm not supportive of throwing $1 million at OPEBs at this time. And then that's just feedback. And then the second question I have, and it may be difficult because the schools are not here, but there's an important item in the presentation. 2.2 million is the school's ask is 2.2 million over what's available in the town school partnership. So I guess the first question I have related to this is when did we communicate a figure to the schools that would be plus or minus some percentage of what the town school partnership would be? Because I got to imagine, well, anyway, I guess that's my first question. Chaz, do you have a sense of when that happened?
I can take both.
Oh,
of them.
okay,
It's-
great, okay.
So I would say that, in December, when we prepare the forecast, that is our projection of where we think revenue is going to be and what that translates to for town and school deficits. So when we presented the forecast, we had a school deficit and we had a town deficit. And the difference between the forecast and where we are today is that the revenue picture has improved, but the school deficit has actually increased because their expenditure projection has increased.
Right. So I guess the reason why I asked this question is I'm just surprised that at this stage of the game, the schools are $2.2 million off the forecasted or projected town school partnership. Now, I don't know why. Maybe it's communication. I'm not sure, but I'm concerned that we're going down a path of the town isn't allocating enough money for the schools and therefore we have to cut the budget. I'm hoping that I know there's a new individual for finance on the school side that we can work out a collaborative, communicative process. And I know it's been happening, but I'm hoping more of it will happen, Chaz, in the coming year to help better coordinate these two, because that's a huge gap between what they're saying they need and what we actually can do. And I am very, very concerned about it.
And I do want to say, we on staff have a good collaborative relationship with
Yep.
the school team, with the superintendent, his team, and on our team here. We understand that these are tough times for everyone and that we're all going to have to figure out how to make this work within the confines of the system that we have. And so, a big part of that, right, is that I think over the years with turnover and shift in that, the timeline for some of this stuff has just kind of fallen out of whack. And maybe there isn't as much clarity on the school side about, when December, this is the number. And maybe there's the opportunity for us to take more time in January to work collaboratively before either town or school publishes their budget book, to ensure that we're not at this place where the schools feel compelled to publish in January, very early on in the process. And then be told, well, I'm sorry, but that's not the number. So we want to work with them to make sure that we get this right.
Right. And I thank you for that. And I think that's important. I have children in the school system, as you know, young children in the lower grades. I'm a strong supporter of the schools and the school budget, but that is a big gap. And anything that we could do to work with them and have them work with us to have a more collaborative process so we don't end up in a situation like this. And I think this has been happening for the past couple of years. We have to do it. So my 2 points in summary, I'd like to see a better improvement on where we're allocating money near term in the CIP for fixing these atrocious roads that we have and seeing if we can resolve whatever disconnect is between the town and the schools. Thanks.
Can I just comment on that, Bernard?
Yeah, quick comment.
So, very quick comment. I will say, having been involved in the town school partnership for a long time, that the meetings have been explicit. Explicit. That is, we have been, it's been very clear to anybody, whether town or school, what the limitations were. And I think that, perhaps one of the problems that the school department has had is that it has had a significant change in complete turnover in financial, in their financial staff, and that the new staff seems to be getting a good grip, but they may have encountered some surprises as they were getting that grip.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it goes back many, many years.
Yeah.
It's just the chaos, both in the financial area as well as the schools generally.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Can we move on to the advisory committee? Any questions?
PM, you need to go to the,
Oh, there's no microphone there?
No, sorry. Unfortunately, if you're in the room, we just ask that you come over to the podium here, the little seat here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pam Lodish on the advisory committee. My question to you is,
Pam, pull the mic over there.
I've been on the capital subcommittee for a long time on the advisory committee. And one of the concerns over time has been school budgeting for new buildings that are brought online. And they weren't part of the original. So I want you to look at the cost and try to figure out in the future, the cost of maintenance that's going to increase with the Driscoll School, with the new Pierce School, with, because that's one of the real holes, in my opinion, and that we need to really think about when we talk about having new buildings, how we're going to maintain them, in addition to fixing the ones we have. So that would be something that I'd really like you to think about, what's driving part of the increase in the school budget that's unfunded. Okay. And the other thing I just wanted to ask you is, it seems to me that the schools have a cheerleading squad, and I worry about the town departments who have significant needs as well, but they don't have the individual groups behind them to make some of their requests happen as well. And my last one is about parking meters. You're increasing the parking meter fees, and that makes sense. But I've always wondered for years why you don't increase the parking people who put the tickets on your cars.
Enforcement is one of those questions that we are definitely looking into. We want to be sure that
And it
we're-
involves more people.
it involves, right, the allocation appropriately. And I'll just assure you, I'm a big cheerleader for the departments. I'm a big cheerleader for the departments. And I want to be very clear that the town team is very, very cognizant of the what's needed and the limitations that are on us in this environment. We want to be good stewards of people's money. When 71% of this comes out of people's taxes directly, we want to be sure that people are getting a good return on their investment. So that's another big component of this that we're working very diligently on. So thank you.
Do you want to answer the question regarding the maintenance costs that come from new buildings, and where in the budget do we capture that?
Sure. So the repair and maintenance costs are housed within the school plant subprogram of the building department. This year, the adjustments that we are making, one of them is to right-size the utility budget, primarily around the cost estimates that were used in fiscal 23 needed to be corrected. And we're kind of seeing that all come to roost in fiscal 25. Charlie's done a lot of work with, both Charlies have done a lot of work, Charlie Simmons and Charlie Young, trying to make sure that we're meeting the projections that we are currently seeing this year. And then also what Driscoll will be a full year in fiscal 25. So that's part of the bump that is being seen in utilities as well. And, I think that the school committee is definitely engaged on really understanding the components of the repair and maintenance budget, more so than I have seen in recent history. I've spent a lot of time with both Helen Charlupsky and Mariah Nobrega, kind of going through the nitty gritty aspects of the building department budget so that they are fully aware of how we build it and, what's in, what's not in. So I'm hopeful that that will help them as they're looking for, Pierce costs and trying to make sure that we have that fully covered. We do rely on the engineers that are providing us with estimates, and sometimes even the engineers don't get it right. So, it's something that we're constantly trying to make sure that we are tweaking and improving, and, hopeful that we, in fiscal 25, you've done enough course correcting that we won't see another visit to the advisory committee.
Dennis.
So Dennis Dowdy, Chair of the Advisory Committee. I wanted to echo what Mike had said earlier about encouraging with the increased streetscape work, to publish in advance some indication. I've had this, pardon?
Credit Paul.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was John.
John.
I'm sorry.
Actually,
My
sorry, John.
bad.
Okay, beg your
I
pardon.
want to echo what John said.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with the town administrator in the past. I think that, one of the sort of great features of other parts of the DPW budget relating to playground, improvements is that everyone knows when it's coming and what the priority is and what to expect. And so it tends to decrease the level of concern, because that the town is taking your concerns seriously. I also wanted to really commend in this budget process the attention to dealing with the building maintenance issues. This has been a hot button issue of ours for the past couple of budget cycles, and also the $1 million off the top initially as part of shared between the town and the schools, I think is extremely beneficial as well. I will have some specific questions, but mostly during subcommittee hearings. But I did want to ask about classroom capacity and the CIP. Is this rental properties? Is it our standard question, or is it something else?
We're still funding the leases through the classroom capacity account. I know that the advisory committee does feel strongly on that. They are moving out of the Clark Road lease, and they recognize that that is the motivation for, to not be in these lease agreements. And I think that they are also, wanting to pursue that. I think, as we are renovating Pierce and hopefully able to get rid of some of these leases, maybe we will see those costs go down even further. But currently what's in the CIP reflects the current agreements that they have for lease space.
Okay, I'm not sure we're happy about that answer, but
Right. I mean, the only way to really slide that into the operating budget would be to, provide the funding there. And there's just so much pressure on the operating side. We would really kind of need to reconfigure the amount of money that's devoted to the CIP in order to make that happen.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Paul, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. Dennis had triggered that I wanted to say something about the roadways. I talked about the budget and asking to increase the budget because it's important and needed. But the second point that I didn't mention was the policy barrier. So I think one of the reasons why we don't see a list of streets that are going to be repaved and repaired is because, in my understanding, this comes from a conversation with the commissioner, the DPW, is that in order to, once we are going to repave a road from curb to curb, it triggers complete streets. And once you trigger complete streets, that's to study the redesign of the entire roadway. And this is a significant barrier to us performing maintenance of our roads. And I've asked for, and I'm hoping that in the near future, this will be an agenda item on the select board's agenda, which is a revisit and discussion around the complete streets policy. The complete street policy is a good one. I think it's important. I think we need to make our roads, our public ways more accessible for multiple users. But it shouldn't prevent us from doing just the basic maintenance of the roadways. It would be like saying, I need to replace my roof, but I can't do it until I redesign my house. If you need to replace the roof because it's leaking, you replace the roof. You redesign the house when you want to redesign the house. So I'm hoping that we can revisit this policy soon. Maybe we won't make some changes, but I do think we need to have the discussion because I think it inhibits the ability to do the basic work on the roads that we need to do other than paint stripes and fill potholes.
Mike, I don't see anyone from the advisory
You
committee.
got some on the big board.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just,
Yeah.
there are also online members of the advisory committee that I
Oh,
can see with their
then
hand raised as
certainly
well.
let them go first.
I see a look there.
Hello.
Were you next? Okay.
I'm not sure what the order was, the hand raising. to be
Well, I
honest.
called on you so that you're the first one in.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. First of all, my name is Alok Samani. I'm on the advisory committee. At-large member. I want to thank Charles and Melissa, obviously. Fantastic job, as usual. My third year, and I think I'm finally starting to understand the budget a little bit. One thing I wanted just to ask about, and I'm curious where we're at now in terms of the current amount of our balance sheet obligations, and that would be inclusive of pension obligations in the OPEB, where we are currently, whether there's a projection for that going forward, and whether there's a view, whether we have a view as to what is actually a sustainable amount of debt that the town can carry. Thank you.
I'm going to turn that question over to our finance director, Lincoln Heineman.
Thanks, Melissa. So we think of it as percent funded. And I was actually just seeking to pull that up in terms of what our percent funded is. So for the pension plan, we are at this moment 68.8% funded of expected out year liabilities. There continues to be, as Melissa and Chaz mentioned earlier, the current plan is to be fully funded with our outstanding large liabilities by fiscal year 2030. There will continue to be ongoing costs after that, but we will consider to be 100% funded except for the pay-as-you-go expenses going forward come fiscal year 2030 for pension. For OPEB, I'm sorry, I thought I had that percentage right in front of me, but it's below 40%. I can get that number for you. I believe it's 37% funded at the moment. And the current projection would be that when the major outstanding liabilities for the pension system are funded in 2030, that the outstanding monies would or at least a portion of them would be diverted to fully fund our OPEB obligations.
Can I ask, there was a suggestion that we divert some of the money going into the OPEB payments to other purposes. How would that be seen by the rating agencies, for example? I mean, do they care about that? I assume they do, but how do they care?
In terms of come fiscal year 2030, and
we reduce the amount going in on an annual basis.
If the amount was reduced, I don't know, they would not look favorable.
Who's suggesting a reduction, Bernard? There's been no suggestion of reduction. The way the OPEBs are being funded by the CIP, it's 250,000, which we do annually.
Right.
We're throwing an additional $1 million on top of that. So we're not reducing. We wouldn't be reducing.
Well, I mean, we're throwing an additional $1 million on there for a reason. Just want to make sure that we understand what the consequences of that would be.
So I would say that the ratings agencies would probably rather see us put that money into the stabilization fund, because that's really, they want to make sure that our unfunded, our undesignated fund balance is as high as it can be. In terms of OPEBs, this is a recommendation, is not a policy requirement to put the $1 million additional. We can have conversations with the advisory committee on that, but I will say that these are unfunded liabilities that are taking up capacity. Eventually it will roost in capacity in the regular operating budget. So what we're paying for in our pension system currently is our current employees plus the employees that we didn't fund however many years ago. And so that is a $33 million budget that would be less if we had funded it when we needed to. So that's kind of what we're trying to achieve with the OPEBs, is to make sure that, 20 years from now, when it's 2040-ish, we can say, oh, thank God we made sure that we took care of this when we, had the capacity to do so. These are all choices, though. I mean, there are, everything has, an implication if it's funded or not funded. And these are the discussions that will play out as we go through the budget.
Thank you. Carlos? Carlos Jorgejo.
Thank you, Bernard. And thank you for all the staff for putting all this together. I just wanted to reiterate two things that have been said. One of them is I do strongly believe that rentals of classrooms is part of the operating cost of not capital costs, because we're not doing when we're expending that money, it's not covering something that we will be using for many years. It's just covering that period of time. So I also strongly oppose the idea of using that capital money to pay for rentals for classrooms. So the classroom capacity item, and I know that Melissa knows this very well. My other comment would be that so now we have two buildings that are using more electricity or more energy than estimated. I do understand that Driscoll doesn't have the geothermal up and running yet, so we don't know how much it will be using once the geothermal is up and running. But it's concerning, and also because for example, when the geothermal was presented to the town meeting, it was presented as a item that would be cost savings in utilities in the future, and so far it looks like that's not the case. So I just wanted to find out a little bit more how we are planning to increase our allotment for utilities for the future as these new buildings, all electric buildings, come online. And since the Pierce School is being designed right now, maybe also letting the engineers know that some of the previous buildings that have been built downtown are not on target with predictions. Thank you.
Sure. I can say that, Charlie Young has done a lot of great work. And I think when you have your public hearing with the building department, you'll be able to see kind of his projection and the basis for it, and comparing that to, I think him and Charlie Simmons are pretty much very close to being on the same page in terms of they both project it differently, but they're right in the same ballpark. In terms of the forecast in the out years of the plan, we currently have a 250,000 annual growth for utilities assumed in there. Obviously, we will need to have an estimate that we can put in for Pierce. And then as we do these electrification projects, we would also need to factor in something to account for that as well. At the same time, we're also, still investing in energy conservation measures through the CIP. So hopeful that there might be an offset there as we're seeing some of our portfolio grow.
Paul?
Thank you, Melissa.
Oh, I'm
Just
sorry.
to follow up on that one. In many cases, like for example, when the schools are built, the school departments or the school department is the one who is basically spearheading the construction and design of the buildings, but then it's the town department that has to maintain it and pay for the utilities. So I just want to make sure that those two are aligned, both the wants and the two hands that sort of work together, and that would be reinforcing this point to the school department, that those numbers, those projections are not coming so far for those two buildings as projected. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, did you want to? I'm sorry.
I would just say that, that we did have to adjust significantly in fiscal 25, and the school department definitely saw the impact of those adjustments. And I think that is motivating them to really understand what the need is and how to better prepare for it.
Thank you.
Okay. Elisa, did you have your hand up? Yeah, I think Carol Levin and then Donnell, if you don't mind. Okay. Carol, I'm sorry.
So yeah,
Yes.
just real quick, because Linda Olsen-Pelkey noted in the chat, didn't want to lose this, that Alok's kind of second question about the sustainability of the debt load. is our current debt sustainable? I wanted to let Melissa and maybe Lincoln, if he wants to, kind of talk about that.
Sure. If you look in section 7 of the capital plan, you'll see projected debt, which I believe our height currently is fiscal 24. And then it proceeds to go down as we're paying off for these projects right now. So in terms of, the sustainability of that debt level, that is something that the select board has flagged at the last retreat, that they would be interested in potentially looking at a policy on excluded debt and what our limits should be for that. So that's something that Lincoln and I will be focused on once we kind of get on the brunt of the budget process. It's something that he and I would like to try and present to the board. And then in terms of, sustainability of that, it really is about the voters and the ability to pay and the confidence that they have and, wanting to fund these projects. I will say that there was a request through the schools for feasibility money for Baker, and that's currently not in the plan. They have also requested a capital study for $250,000 in fiscal 25. That is in the plan. So I think as that, as we talk about, what the needs are and what projects we can and can't take on, these are kind of important conversations so that everyone can recognize that we're really at probably our highest level for debt ever. And what is reasonable to fit into the CIP, both within the levy and outside the levy, that makes people feel comfortable that we can, continue to pay it.
Okay, Carol.
Thank you. And thanks, Melissa, Charlie, and Chaz for all your hard work in pulling this together. So, I firmly believe that having an accurate allocation of costs is key to being able to make informed decisions. And to that end, the allocation of revenues for the town school budget, you have fixed costs, deduct shared non-departmental costs of $162 million. And I think it's important to have more clarity or transparency on that, is what that $162 million consists of and how it's allocated or how it's derived. I recently, as a result of the last town school partnership meeting, my interest was piqued by the notice or the line that the increase in property insurance costs was being shared 50-50 between the town and the schools, yet the town facilities represent only 20% of the insured value, and the school facilities is almost 80% of the insured values. And I'm concerned both how we are allocating that as a shared departmental expense and the increases, and that we're just, once again, not fully understanding the occupancy costs or the capital decisions that are being made by the schools and the town. So I'm hoping that you can give a better breakdown of that $162 million to the advisory committee, as well as some information as to how you're allocating insurance costs between the towns and the schools to capture the difference in the valuations. Thanks.
Sure. One thing that, as we're continuing to tweak the interactive budget, the non-departmental costs, that was something that, I sat with Mariah and Susan and they wanted more detail as well. Those are all sections in our budget book. So one of the things, kind of once we post the PowerPoint, I'm going to provide hyperlinks for each of those components within the town school partnership so that you can understand like what the connection is between what you normally review in the budget, but aren't kind of piecing together as something that comes off the top. And so you can kind of, it's fully articulated within our budget document. It's just the dots just need to be connected. The other piece of it is the insurance, the way that the insurance is allocated town and schools. That is a relic of the current formula, which we have kind of talked about improving in the future. The old formula, the 50-50 formula, that's kind of the way that historically insurance has been allocated town and school. We acknowledge that that doesn't mean that it's where the costs actually are. But we're hoping that as we kind of refine and improve the formula, if that's one of the things that the town school partnership is looking to kind of right size, that we would address that through the new MOAs that the town administrator is wanting to work on with the superintendent, so that, you know, everyone understands kind of what's in, what's not, and why. And so that's something that we can definitely make sure is added to the list.
Okay, next, I'm sorry.
I'm just going to say, I'm hoping advisory can address it because it's not magic. It's something that's easily calculated. Thank you.
Danelle, do you still have your hand up?
Yeah, I put it down. I do have a question. It's probably a simple question. First of all, thank you, Melissa, Chaz, the whole team for getting this together for us in the presentation. I just have a simple question. You can answer it offline or you know, however you want to answer it. I'm curious on where do I find the alcohol sales, like the legit alcohol sales from that have happened in the town, from like liquor stores to restaurants. Like, is that under liquor licenses?
Yeah, so in section 3, our revenue budget.
I'm looking at that right now.
There's a category called licenses and permits.
Yep, I'm looking at that right now.
And so under licenses and permits, alcohol sales is part of that.
That's where it says liquor licenses, or is that
Yes.
alcohol sales?
It's both.
Okay, it's just because I'm not seeing alcohol, you know, I'm
Yep.
seeing liquor licensing. All right, thank you.
No problem.
Elisa? Yes.
Hi, I'm Lisa Jonas, advisory committee member, and thank you for all your presentations and all your work. I have a few things. One, just speaking to Paul's point about the OPEBs, I just want to maybe support what Melissa said, that I'm concerned about the percent that we're underfunded on OPEBs, and I think it would be wise to fund that. I would rather see that $1 million somehow coming from somewhere else. And I'm speaking as someone who has one of the worst roads in Brookline that was number 2 a while ago and never got taken care of. And one place that I've always thought, why? So we have the accrued benefits for employees. Why don't we eliminate paying out lump sums for vacation, just requiring people to take their vacations and not paying them for not doing it? And I think that has 2 benefits. It saves the town money and it encourages people to take vacation, which is healthy.
Alas,
Yeah.
we cannot force people, we can implement a cap going forward, after which we say.
Right. No, I realize we can't do that now.
Yeah,
Right.
And that's what we want to do, is we want to get under a set cap for folks, want to make sure, but what we can't do is say we won't pay you out for what's already accrued.
Right. No, I understand that, but just for the future.
Yeah.
Um,
High priority.
Yeah. The other thing is seeing Regina here. She has been mentioning the water pipes and that the water pipes are in poor condition. And shouldn't we have those repaired before we repair the streets? And I'm wondering if there's been any thought given to that. I know nothing about the water pipes, but I am curious. I don't want to have streets repaired and then them getting torn up again. Another thing I want to say is that I am disappointed that the Council on Aging has gotten reduced funding. I think the elderly population is large and it's growing, and I think it has some of the greatest needs in town, and they consistently seem to get pushed aside. And I would like to also see that with the town school partnership, if the schools are at 60% and the town is at 40%, that both sides should stick to that commitment and not end up running deficits that then get taken from the other side. And kind of related to that, I'm curious to know why the police have FTEs that are not funded in order to compensate for the contract salary increases. But that's not something that happened at in the schools. In the schools, we had an override to cover the contracts and we didn't cut FTEs. So I'm wondering, is that because we've made an analysis of police personnel and decided that we don't need that much personnel, or why is there that different approach? Yeah. Oh, and the other thing is I am wondering why we just put millions of dollars into Lars Anderson. I'm curious what the next 12 million is for, and also 6.5 million for the athletic fields at Sewell and 6.5 million at Baker. Those are very large numbers, and I want to know, where did that come from?
Sure. I'll try and remember the order of
Sorry.
your questions. No, that's fine. I would say that the water and sewer, I think, they are very collaborative with the engineering department in DPW. And so any roadway work is, tightly coordinated. Jay Hersey will be able to tell you about kind of what is in the queue and what their plans are. Kind of in the out years, they do have a lot of stormwater work that they're looking to tackle. So when DPW comes in front of advisory, he'll be able to talk to that, and we'll make sure that he's got a heads up that you're looking for that as well. In terms of the Council on Aging, that budget reduction is actually the elimination of the use of free cash. The advisory committee chose to use free cash at the end of the year to fund the strategic plan for the Council on Aging. It was a one-time cost. It was a one-time study.
Mhm.
They ended up getting a grant for it, so they didn't need it. So we pulled that because it was one-time money, and we don't like to have one-time money in the operating budget. So if you just take that aside, their budget is not going down.
Right, though, but overall, it's a very small budget for a large part of the Brookline population.
Right. And I think that between, the increase that they're seeing through the override plus the boost that they saw through the adjustments in salaries with the social workers, we're hopeful that they are satisfied with their allocation. I think we've met the requests that they've made, and you'll hear more from them on that. In terms of collective bargaining, Chaz, I defer to you on that.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, right, we've talked with the chief, and we want to make sure that we are in the right space here. And like I said, it's tough. It's a tough situation. We want to be competitive. We want to be funding, and we want to get our money's worth with a collective bargaining deal. I don't want to speak about negotiations that are in progress, but I want to say that we're very grateful to all the unions, police union and so forth, for being collaborative partners on these issues, understanding and discussing. I think the issue, what I am hoping will come to fruition in time for town meeting this year will be something that I think town meeting will approve of in terms of ongoing contracts, but the money has to come from somewhere. The reality of the situation is, if we want to be providing that level of salary and support, then the most obvious place for it to come from is the department that it's providing it from.
But have they decided that they don't need that amount of FTEs currently, and that?
I think what the chief would say is that if we want to run what we're currently running, then we do need FTEs, and we need people in there. It becomes more difficult, but we're not yet at a point where we're worried that we're effectively robbing ourselves with an overtime budget, because it increased overtime if those FTEs are held open. Recall right now, on paper, we have 18 vacancies in the police department. So holding 4 of those 18 open may not seem like, given the vacancies we have, we're not likely to reach that number in the next fiscal year. But over time, we want to be competitive, which is why we're saying we're not eliminating these positions. We're evaluating what it is like to hold these open at this juncture to make sure that that is correct. And if it's not, we need to look at where else we can be finding funds to fund these contracts.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the Council on Aging question about the reduction, the 100,000. So my understanding was that, like you said, AC allocated 100,000 for some strategic planning that needed to be done. And then a grant came through from the state legislature, I believe. So we had a request to transfer the money, the 100,000, over to, I think we're going to paint inside,
Capital outlay.
right? Capital,
Purchasing for furniture.
right? Furniture, that I thought it was painting of furniture. And subsequently, that $100,000 was clawed back from the state because they cut it. And so that money is no longer available for a strategic plan. So that's my understanding of the current situation. That money was cut by the state. So we don't have that.
Well, we can clarify with Ruth Ann, but I believe that the actual cost of the study came in significantly lower. So the reduction that the state made, they were still able to fund the study.
Yeah, because the state only cut it in half. They didn't call it all the way back.
But we reduced by 100,000 in the budget. So should we only have reduced by 50?
So the reduction is in fiscal 25. The work that you're talking about is happening this current fiscal year.
It's in the last year's budget?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mike.
Wait, can any, Can anyone speak to
Oh.
the 12 million, the 6.5 million, the 6 million in recreation parks?
Okay,
Lars
sure,
Anderson?
yes, thank you. So I would say that
Fields.
Alexander will be able to provide you with the plan for Lars Anderson. Obviously, with such a large property, that work is kind of ongoing and seemingly endless. But there is a plan, and I think that they could talk through it when they have their budget review. Same thing with Sewell. I think, that park was put on hold while we were kind of in the midst of the night school and what are we doing and where is it
Mhm.
going to be? So that cost has grown substantially, but DPW will be prepared to talk about the components of that project.
Okay, okay. Thanks.
Mike,
So if I could, as I said at the beginning, I have some additional questions, and I'd like to see if I could get a little bit on those.
now's your time.
Thank you very much. So one question is, looking at at what's being done with free cash, there's nothing additional being put into the collective bargaining reserve. Is that correct? Or is that?
Right, because free cash is one time in nature and collective bargaining is ongoing.
And so the collective bargaining reserve is funded through?
Through regular ongoing operating revenue.
Okay, thank you. Should have known that. Thank you. The other thing I wanted to mention is, the discussion about the additional $1 million for pensions is a really interesting one. And I very much in sympathy with the idea that some of that money, or, it's really urgent to get the roads fixed. I can tell you that a pothole feels a lot worse on a bicycle than it does in a car. And it's actually a little bit more dangerous, or a lot more dangerous sometimes. So I understand the pressure, but I also think that the long-term implications of funding a reduction in the pension obligations is a wise. I feel like that's a wise use of the funds myself, as concerned as I am about those potholes. The other thing I would say is there's in here is a comment, and I think Chaz made the comment earlier in his presentation about the need to encourage business development. And we made a significant change in zoning along Harvard Street to allow for by right zoning. And I think it's really important to make sure that we don't erode that by right, those by right provisions by making changes in the way the planning board, the planning board's input is handled in our zoning bylaws specifically for those zones. I think sustainable economic development is a really important thing if we're going to get past the problem that we very clearly have, which is a tremendous reliance on residential tax revenue. And the last thing I would say is that when we're looking, if we have another year of free cash someday, if we're looking at capital expenditures, it would be very wise to turn some of our capital expenditures to retrofitting town buildings, recognizing that we've just heard about the initial increase in utility costs for Driscoll, but presuming that that geothermal really does hold the promise of reducing utility costs, that we begin to look at that for the town operated building as well as the schools.
Great. Did you have your hand up, Paul?
I did. I'm going to respectfully disagree with the OPEBs. Again, the roadways are a public safety hazard right now, not only for cyclists, but for walkers. And if you cross the street, I mean, it's universally, they're in very bad shape. Now, I agree that we need to get ahead of OPEBs. That's why we have an existing policy of funding $250,000 per year. And then when we pay off the insurance, the other obligation, that money would then go towards paying off OPEBs. I'm all for dealing with long-term obligations. It's a natural place that I would first go. But we have ignored our roadways for so long. We've neglected them for so long. And we're asking current residents to pay for something in the future that's not going to benefit them. It'll benefit the next group of inhabitants. in the meantime, they need to suffer through the existing roadways. So again, I think that I've talked briefly about this with the town administrator. Maybe there's a balance. Maybe we don't throw all a complete million at it. But I think we need to balance this near term and long term dance that we're doing. And I think as a cyclist, you'll know, we really have been pretty neglectful of our roadways. And again, I wouldn't bring it up if we're not hearing so much about it. It is at a fever pitch. So I would hope that we can make some adjustment in how much we're putting towards long-term obligations.
Yeah, the things that are the things that people speak about the most, residents speak about the most, are the things that are most visible to them. They don't think about OPEBs, they think about condition of the streets because they're walking and driving and biking and so forth. So I understand the impetus. I think we just have to balance things.
I don't see anyone's hand raised either in the audience here or online.
Do you want to give members of the public?
Yeah, well, let's see if we, okay, no one wants to talk from the advisory committee or the select board. Let's open this up to public comment.
At this time, there are approximately 20 virtual attendees and a dozen in person. Regina, you can approach the presentation station. Your 3 minutes will begin.
Hi, Regina Frawley from Precinct 16. And my ears don't always hear as fast as Jazz speaks, but I'll do my best. A few things that strike me. First of all, I want to remind everyone that Tony and Ray are gone apparently, and they both had qualified as certified project managers for the schools. And you say you've now got somebody online. Are they also project manager?
Yes.
Well, then why aren't they this person doing the peer school? Because I saw the contract for the peer school and they're using an outside project manager, and that's a lot more expensive than our staff.
We're doing both. We need
Wait a
both.
minute,
I'm sorry. Yeah. We're doing both. LAP is working on the peer school. Our internal team is working on it. But for the capacity of a project that size, we need outside assistance as well. So we do have LAP as, again, continuing Tony and Ray's good work of ensuring that we're balancing the budget and working appropriately. But there is money in the budget specifically for assistance for an LPM because of the size of the project. It's too big for one or even two people on the town side.
I don't have it in front of me, but it was a lot of money for this person.
It is, but it's also, it's money being spent to ensure that we don't go over budget on this project.
Right. The second issue that struck me is you gave a lot of praise to the Golf Enterprise Fund. I wonder if you know that at the time, maybe about 15 years ago, I'm not sure right now, we were in line with every other municipal golf course in the area. There's at least 5 in the greater Boston area, and none of them had a paid salary pro. And we instituted that. And that's a significant change. Prior to that, they ran the golf carts. Everything they did, they made money from the golf shop, et cetera, but they didn't have a salary. And they gave lessons, and now we have to do that. And I don't know if we get the money from the lessons, but that's a significant thing because you've added somebody to the pension. And that's something I think you ought to look at. Also, the second thing about the golf course was that they like to brag that they made money. But one of the ways they made money was they reduced their contribution to the town. So they went from, say, at the time, 50 grand down to 25. We need to know those kinds of budget kinds of manipulations before we realize we're really getting the bang for our buck. And maybe there are opportunities for savings in there. I'm also, and the only person in the room who can answer this is Melissa. We were at risk a number of years ago for losing our AAA rating. And the number one reason was there wasn't enough percentage in the free cash, which I think you probably know. It was below 5%. It was like 4.3%, something like that. They redefined free cash so that it could increase the percentage. And Melissa would know what the why they changed the definition, or not why, I told you why, but what the basis of that shift in the definition that allowed us to report that it was increased. This was done originally, pointed out to us by the audit committee, the outside auditor, who said you just don't have enough. And you are at risk at AAA loss. That's probably enough for you to think about, but these are very serious issues that have pushed the cost of running the town up significantly. And yes, thank you to my colleague Alyssa for the Russet Road. The DPW former head had testified that a cast iron pipes, water pipes, had no more than about 110, 115 years to it. Ours on Russet Road are 100. We stopped the original contract about 3 years ago because we wanted the gas pipes replaced. We had that many leaks on the street, and that was finally done. But why wouldn't you do now that you're talking either a surface or you're going to do a real street repair that might keep us peaceful for 20, 25 years? Because it is the worst, I think, in town. And many of the cuts in the road that have made it the worst are from the water repairs. 10 years ago, only one of my constituents on Russet Road had to replace their home water pipes, which are also cast iron. The current thing now is several of my constituents on the same road have had to do it. So the rust is corroding. Why would we think that the main lines are any less corrosive? And not least argument, the Beverly Road, which had younger pipes than Russet Road because it was developed later, they've been replaced, maybe arguably because of the schools that is on Beverly Road. But also, I witnessed Hancock Village getting it done, and they had even younger pipes. So it's time for us to have this. It's ridiculous how many holes there are and ruts and everything on Russet Road. And it was only done 23 years ago. Usually these roads should have at least 30 years. I waited 30 years for the 23 years ago, and it's a mess. It was a mess 2 months after it was installed when the cable company came in and did a trench, and it never has been adequate. So thank you.
So just to address those points, in terms of the golf course, our general manager is focused exclusively on running the business of the golf course. Previously, we had a model where they were allowed to also generate their own revenue from golf lessons, and that we've discontinued that because we really think that the focus should be on trying to make sure that the course is a sustainable enterprise, which I think that they've been doing great work, especially through the addition of the driving range and all the extra events that they're having at the course. We're really happy with the way that the current model is working. Previously, probably about 15, 20 years ago, the golf course did used to transmit their surplus to the general fund every year. A piece of their surplus used to be sent to the town. We discontinued that because golf courses aren't always kind of making gangbuster money. And so a lot of times you need to make sure that the golf course has some retained earnings so that if they have a bad year, particularly something like happened this year, we had a ton of rain at the beginning of fiscal 24. And so every day in the summer, I'm sure you remember that it rained, and every day in the summer, I was thinking about the golf course. And so the fact that they have a healthy fund balance, ending on fiscal 23 is going to serve them well. We may very well need to adjust in fiscal 24 through a budget amendment, but we're hopeful that the activity currently in the course will mean that we won't have to, but it's something that we're continuing to monitor. Obviously the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund, more will come when we have the DPW team in front of us. I will say that we are seeing benefits from the investments that we have made in water and sewer through our MWRA rates. We are, seeing some benefit from the investments that we have done. And then in terms of the undesignated fund balance, that is something that we are focused on. And it was an issue where a number that was reported in the audit was calculating it differently from the way that ratings agencies were connecting it. So we've kind of made sure that the audit and the metrics that are used by the ratings agencies that we're continuing to examine and that we're currently on pace and even exceeding the goal of the 10%. So thank you.
Okay, I don't see anyone
I mean,
except John.
except me. Thank you very much. Just as a quick preface, I like to go back and look at actual numbers, which get reported in the budget documents. And they're always 2 years prior to what the budget year is. So for FY25, we have FY23 actual numbers. And then same thing going backwards a year, we have FY22 actual numbers, then FY21 actual numbers, et cetera. So I'm going to just read off, starting with FY23 and then going backwards. The actual overtime in the police department going back 5 years, starting with 1.26 million, 1.14 million, 1.13 million, 1.60 million, 1.71 million. So that's the actual experience of overtime in the police budget year after year for 5 years. And what doesn't kind of line up with that is that in FY24, we budgeted 792,000, knowing that, year after year prior to FY24, there had been in excess of $1 million in overtime. And for FY25, we're budgeting $1 million, which actually is, it's a lot more. And in that sense, it's an improvement. But are we ever going to actually bring overtime, not just in the police department, but let's say in the fire department as well and other departments? Are we ever going to bring it in line in terms of the budget number, bring it in line with what we end up actually experiencing, which turns out in many, many cases to be hundreds of thousands of dollars more than what we budget?
So John, the way that we budget for all of our departmental budgets is we fully fund vacant positions. So what you're seeing as an overage and overtime is actually being funded with salary savings from the vacancies. And so if you kind of roll up the entirety of the personnel budget, there is no deficit. There is no problem because the vacancy salary savings covers the overage and overtime.
No, I get
If
that.
we right size the overtime budget, we would be reducing the other personnel budgets. And so since it all rolls up, we keep the funding so that people can see kind of how many positions are currently funded. And it works that way in in police and fire. In terms of fire, we've needed to visit the advisory committee for the past couple of years with overtime overages. We have not needed to do that for police. And so what we're doing in fiscal 25 is acknowledging that we don't want to keep going there and needing to draw off the reserve fund. So we're investing $300,000 into the fire overtime budget in order to try and meet that. But it's a combination of funding and also trying to correct behavior, because a lot of the overtime is being driven by sick usage, injury on duty. And so, if we can help monitor the budgets with the chief, kind of trying to work out some of the issues that are happening, we're hoping that the two-pronged strategy will help us be able to make sure that the budgets are sufficient.
Well, yeah, I thank you for that answer. And just so that everyone who heard the answer understands that what I was driving at isn't that we don't have the money to pay for the overtime. It's that overtime is more expensive than regular time. And if overtime is being used because of high levels of sick time or disability time, then we might need to investigate whether we have a problem of a lot of illness or a lot of disability in the department. So I think it's a number worth pondering over, even though we can pay for it because we have vacant positions in these departments. But I do think that explanation is important. I'm glad you added that.
Right. And I think that, we are very cognizant of the issues and we are monitoring those budgets very closely. Charlie has been, he does payroll projections for all departmental budgets. We also collect leave utilization data from the Public Safety Business Office. The Chief Sullivan, this is something that is a very high priority for him. He has been working on this with Charlie Young. We've been meeting quarterly to talk about this. I think there'll be a budget update coming very shortly from Charlie Young now that the budget's out. But this is something that we are very aware of and are, wanting to make sure that we have a handle on what the need is there.
Thanks. That's good to know.
Okay. Don't see, excuse me. I don't see anyone raising their hands on the screen here or in the audience. Any closing remarks before we end this meeting?
Sure. I just wanted to again extend my thanks to the whole team on this, the select board team, the department heads, all the departments. And I want to thank the board and the advisory committee for being here today, members of the public who've been watching this. I do want to say we are at the beginning of the formal budget process now. These numbers are likely to change in certain ways as we go through this process. And they may change substantially depending on issues that we may see during the budget process. For example, we may settle a contract. We may revise, we may get a revision of projections from the state in terms of where the final state aid budget comes from. That doesn't tend to move us significantly, but it could this year. We don't know. So I just want to be clear. This is the opening of a process, and we look forward to working collaboratively with everyone to continue it.
Okay.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Any other comments from the select board or the advisory committee? Seeing none? Okay, that's background. Meeting is over. Thank you.